Family Matters was more than just a sitcom. It was a cornerstone of 90s television that brought families together every week with heartwarming lessons, hilarious moments, and unforgettable characters like Steve Urkel. It celebrated love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of family. But while the show made us laugh and feel at home, real-life sorrow touched some of the talented actors who made it so special. In this tribute, we honor the cast members of Family Matters who have tragically passed away, remembering their roles, their impact, and the legacy they left behind long after the cameras stopped rolling. Michelle Doris Thomas was born on September 23, 1968, in Brookline, Massachusetts. From her earliest days, she was surrounded by the rhythms of artistry. Her father, Dennis Thomas, played saxophone for Kool and the Gang, while her mother was a stage actress. But their financial struggles were quietly devastating. The family lived modestly, barely making ends meet, and young Michelle often slept to the soundtrack of overdue bills and hushed arguments. Her bright personality became a shield early on. Smiles came easily, but her heart carried the weight of instability. Her breakout role came as Myra Monkhouse on Family Matters from 1993 to 1998. Audiences adored Myra, chirpy, obsessive, overflowing with love for Steve Urkel. But Michelle, unlike her character, was gentle, introspective, and often deeply self-critical. Myra was a role she embraced with joy, but behind the scenes, Michelle was quietly fighting a disease that would soon define her fate. Michelle's acting career was just beginning to blossom when her health began to decline. In 1997, she was diagnosed with a rare form of stomach cancer, desmoplastic small round cell tumor. She told almost no one outside her closest circle. She kept working, kept smiling, kept being Myra, even as her body began to betray her. Casting directors stopped calling. Roles disappeared. Her thin frame became too frail for the bright lights. Still, she refused to pity herself, even as Hollywood forgot her. She never married. She was in a long-term relationship with actor Malcolm Jamal Warner, who remained by her side until the end. Their bond was tender but heavy with unspoken sorrow. Michelle had always dreamed of being a mother, of building a life that cancer ultimately took from her. In her final days, she returned to her childhood home in New Jersey, where she was surrounded by family and prayer. Michelle Thomas passed away on December 23, 1998, at just 30 years old. Her net worth at the time was approximately $100,000. Not a fortune, but a reflection of a career cut tragically short. Michelle never got to show the full range of her talent. But for a few bright years, she lit up television screens, and hid behind them a young woman aching to live a longer, fuller life. Rosetta Lenoir was born Rosetta Olive Burton on August 8, 1911, in Hell's Kitchen, New York City, a neighborhood already infamous for its cruelty to the poor. Her childhood was one of pain masked by survival. As a child, she was stricken with rickets, a bone disease that left her with a permanent limp. The shame of her physical condition marked her early years, teaching her to smile through humiliation. Her father, a reverend, was strict and distant. Affection was rare. She learned early that strength and silence often went hand in hand. As a young woman, Rosetta turned to the stage, drawn to its freedom and its promise of escape. Acting was a rebellion and a salvation. Her career spanned theater, film, and television, but it was her role as Estelle Mother Winslow on Family Matters from 1989 to 1998 that made her a household name. On screen, she was wise, warm, and full of sass, the grandmother every viewer wished they had. But in real life, Rosetta bore deep personal grief. She was a widow early in life, losing her husband, actor Harry Lenoir, to illness. The sorrow of that loss never left her, though she rarely spoke of it. They had one child, a son, who struggled with mental illness and addiction, casting a long shadow over her later years. Her fierce devotion to her family never wavered, but it wore her down quietly. Off-screen, Rosetta was a quiet warrior in the fight for racial inclusion in the arts. She founded the Amas Repertory Theater, an integrated company in a time when such a thing was radical. But her activism came at a cost. Producers and casting agents often turned away, seeing her as too political. She endured countless rejections not because of talent, but because of color and courage. By the late 1990s, her health had begun to fail. Still, she refused to be seen as weak. Her final appearances on Family Matters were filmed while she was in great physical pain, her energy waning, her limp more pronounced. But she never once asked for sympathy. Rosetta Lenoir passed away on March 17, 2002, in Teaneck, New Jersey, at the age of 90. At the time of her death, her net worth was estimated at $500,000, earned through a lifetime of labor, often underpaid and underappreciated. She gave the world the gift of dignity through her characters, even while her own life was marked by sorrow, sacrifice, and unseen strength. Behind every line spoken as Mother Winslow was the voice of a woman who had lived pain and mastered it without ever letting it define her. Sherman Alexander Hemsley was born on February 1, 1938, in South Philadelphia. Raised by a single mother who worked in a factory, Sherman rarely saw his father. The neighborhood was rough, and so was life at home. Money was scarce, and dreams were even scarcer. His childhood was marked by isolation. He was a shy, soft-spoken boy who stuttered when nervous and often disappeared into comic books and old radio shows, longing for a world far from his own. He served in the Air Force and later worked for the Postal Service during the day, while taking acting classes at night. His breakthrough came as George Jefferson on All in the Family and later The Jeffersons. America loved the loud, brash character who stomped across TV screens with pride and arrogance. But Sherman was nothing like George. Off camera, he was quiet, eccentric, and deeply reclusive. Fame, for him, was a double-edged sword. It gave him wealth and recognition, but also forced him to live behind a mask. In 1994 to 1995, he joined Family Matters as Captain Marion Savage, but by then, the applause felt distant. The roles were smaller, the energy lower. He began to retreat further into himself. Sherman never married, never had children. His closest relationships were with a few longtime friends, but even they were often kept at arm's length. He lived alone in El Paso, Texas, far from Hollywood, surrounded by memorabilia and silence. He was known to speak to himself for hours, reenacting old scenes, reading scripts no one had asked him to perform. His house became both sanctuary and prison. The eccentricities many laughed at were, in truth, the behaviors of a man who didn't know how to cope with solitude. His television laugh was unforgettable, but few heard the quiet behind it. Sherman Hemsley died on July 24, 2012, of complications from lung cancer. He was 74. His estimated net worth at the time of his death was $3 million. But money meant little in a life where connection had slipped away. He had once brought joy to millions, but in the end, his own joy was a fleeting, elusive thing. A man adored by audiences, yet mostly alone, Sherman lived not just in the shadow of George Jefferson, but in the quiet ache of never fully being seen as himself. Barry Jenner was born on January 14, 1941, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His upbringing was rigid, shaped by discipline and a father who believed in hard work more than affection. Young Barry longed to become an actor, but in a household where art was seen as a distraction from reality, that dream felt like rebellion. He pushed it down, swallowed it with a smile, and worked silently toward it anyway. He started on stage, earning respect for his serious, steady presence, though never stardom. Fame, for Barry, came not in flashes but in fragments, supporting roles, quiet lines, consistent professionalism. From 1990 to 1992, he portrayed Lieutenant Lou Murtaugh on Family Matters, the stern police officer who often clashed with Carl Winslow. Audiences recognized the face, rarely the name. But Barry didn't mind. He believed in doing the job, showing up on time, and letting others shine. Off-screen, however, his life carried a quiet sorrow. His first marriage ended in disappointment, eroded by long separations and unspoken expectations. In his later marriage to actress Suzanne Hunt, he found more peace, but never the family he once imagined. He had no children. In interviews, he spoke of acting as his only true legacy, A profession that, while noble, often left him feeling replaceable. As Hollywood changed, the calls slowed. Younger faces, louder voices, flashier styles. Barry took what he could: cameos, bit parts, background roles. But with each year, it grew harder. The man who once stood in front of cameras now spent hours in waiting rooms, his name often mispronounced or forgotten. The industry he respected never quite made room for him. In his final years, he battled leukemia, keeping it private until the end. Even in illness, he refused sympathy. He said little, but those close to him noticed his eyes grew tired and distant, like a man reflecting on a journey that never quite reached the destination he'd imagined. Barry Jenner died on August 9, 2016, at the age of 75. His net worth was estimated at $1 million, earned through decades of steady work, though seldom in the spotlight. He left behind no grand awards, no headline eulogies. But in each quiet role, there was a piece of his dignity. Barry was never the star, but always, unmistakably, the professional. And in a business that often values the fleeting, he endured with a quiet grace that, though overlooked, never truly faded. John Lawler was born on November 5, 1941, in the heart of Minnesota, where winters were long and dreams even longer. He grew up in a working-class family, the son of a machinist and a homemaker. Their world was one of hard-earned simplicity, no luxury, just quiet perseverance. From an early age, John felt like an outsider. He was bookish, introverted, and drawn not to sports like the other boys, but to storytelling and history. His family encouraged stability, not risk, so when he spoke of acting, it was met with worried silence. Still, he pushed forward, carving a slow path through regional theater before making modest inroads into television. In 1979, he took on the role of Headmaster Stephen Bradley on The Facts of Life, a character who later crossed over briefly into Family Matters. On screen, he was wise, grounded, and fair, traits that mirrored much of who he was in real life. But Hollywood had little patience for quiet strength. His character was written out after one season, and with it, much of his early momentum faded. John's career never soared, it hovered. He took guest roles, commercials, and the occasional TV movie. He was never a household name, often passed over in favor of louder, younger, or more marketable talent. And with every lost role, a small part of him retreated. Acting, once a passion, became more of a job than a burden. Off-screen, his life was equally restrained. He married once in his 30s, a brief union that collapsed under the weight of disappointment and ambition. They had no children. John never remarried, pouring himself instead into teaching, ironically, finding real life in the role he once played on screen. For years, he taught theater in small colleges, his students unaware they were learning from a man who had quietly walked through Hollywood's coldest corners. He lived modestly in California, far from the celebrity hills. No scandal, no flash, just a quiet man with a bookshelf full of scripts he never got to perform. John Lawler passed away on March 31, 2023, at the age of 81. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $300,000. It was not a fortune, but perhaps it was never about the money. He had wanted to be seen, remembered, celebrated. Instead, he became a lesson in endurance. A man who showed up, did the work, and accepted that sometimes the applause never comes, but the dignity remains. Arnold Herbert Johnson was born on November 15, 1921, in Brooklyn, New York, at a time when black children were rarely encouraged to dream beyond their neighborhood boundaries. His family was poor, his father worked on the docks, his mother cleaned homes. As a child, Arnold often sat by the window, listening to jazz from the street corners, imagining a life where music and words could lift him out of obscurity. But reality was harsher. Segregation, limited opportunities, and daily struggle carved early lines into his soul. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II, but when he returned, America offered little to the black veterans who had bled for it. Acting came by accident, first on the stage, then in small film roles. His performances were subtle but full of gravitas. Though he appeared in a number of iconic films, Shaft, Rocky, He was rarely billed near the top. His face was familiar, but his name remained largely unknown. From 1990 to 1995, Arnold portrayed Fletcher Thomas, the gentle and wise grandfather of Harriet Winslow, on Family Matters. It was perhaps his most visible role, yet even then he appeared sporadically, often as a calm voice in the chaos of the Winslow household. Audiences loved him, but few knew his name. Fewer still knew his pain. Arnold had lived through decades of rejection, not for lack of talent, but because of the color of his skin. He was frequently cast as background characters, janitors, bus drivers, elderly neighbors. Roles with no arc, no depth, no dignity. Still, he never turned bitter. He said little, smiled often, and walked with a dignity born from knowing he deserved better, even if the world didn't see it. His personal life remained mostly private. He was married once, to a schoolteacher, and they had 2 children. But one of his sons died young in a car accident, a tragedy Arnold rarely spoke about, except in quiet moments. It broke something in him that never quite healed. He continued working even when he was ill, taking small roles just to stay connected to the only world that ever gave him a voice. Arnold Johnson passed away on April 10, 2000, at the age of 78. The cause was natural complications from heart failure. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at just $200,000, a humble figure for a man who had spent over 3 decades in film and television. He died without headlines or fanfare, but with a legacy far deeper than ratings or residuals. Arnold was a man who endured, who gave grace to the margins, and whose quiet presence spoke louder than many leading roles ever could. David Graff was born on April 16, 1950, in Zanesville, Ohio, a quiet, unassuming town that gave him safety but not much inspiration. From a young age, David felt different. Sensitive, awkward, and often unsure of his place, he found comfort in impersonations and voices, ways to slip out of himself for a while. His father died when he was just a teenager, an absence that cracked something deep within him. His mother worked tirelessly to support the family, and David, ever the peacemaker, used humor to keep the house from sinking into sorrow. He studied theater at Otterbein College and later at Ohio State, determined to make something of himself despite the odds. Fame found him unexpectedly with the role of Sergeant Eugene Tackleberry in the Police Academy films, a gun-loving, overly intense officer with a wild stare and an absurd sense of duty. Audiences laughed, and David rode that laughter through 6 sequels. He became iconic, but boxed in. Tackleberry stuck to him like glue. Hollywood, cruel in its typecasting, couldn't see past the uniform. He joined Family Matters briefly in 1989 for a guest role. It was fleeting, just another comedic beat. But David hoped every role might lead to something deeper. It rarely did. Behind the booming voice and big grin was a man desperate to prove he could do more, play drama, show nuance. Those chances never truly came. Off-screen, David was a gentle soul, deeply religious, introspective, and devoted to his family. He married Catherine Holcomb, an actress, and they had 2 sons. He adored them, often saying fatherhood was the only role he ever truly mastered. But there was always a restlessness behind his eyes, a sadness that he had peaked too soon, laughed too loud, and been forgotten too quickly. In his later years, David took what roles he could, voiced animated characters, appeared at fan conventions, always gracious, always smiling. Yet his heart was quietly faltering. On April 7, 2001, just days before his 51st birthday, David Graff died of a sudden heart attack during a family wedding in Arizona. His death was swift, shocking, and heartbreakingly silent. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at $500,000. Not a fortune, but enough to show he had worked, persisted, and endured. David made millions laugh, but very few knew the ache beneath his uniform. He wasn't just Tackleberry. He was a father, a thinker, a man who wanted to be seen beyond the punchline. And in the end, that desire lingered far longer than the applause. Jaleel Ahmad White was born on November 27, 1976, in Culver City, California, the only child of a dental hygienist mother and a dentist father. They were a close-knit family, modest but supportive, pouring every resource they had into Jalil's budding talent. He was bright, articulate, and remarkably mature for his age. When he landed the role of Steve Urkel on Family Matters in 1989, he was just 12 years old, but overnight, the awkward boy with suspenders and a nasal whine became a cultural phenomenon. Urkel wasn't meant to last more than one episode. But Jalil's performance, silly, strange, and somehow endearing, captivated audiences. Soon, Family Matters revolved around him. While the world fell in love with Urkel, Jalil began to quietly suffocate beneath him. As a teenager, he longed to be taken seriously, to play someone closer to himself. But everywhere he went, he was, "Did I do that?" Never Jalil. The more famous he became, the lonelier he felt. Behind the scenes, tensions brewed. Some cast members resented his growing spotlight. Jalil, still a child, tried to carry the weight of a multi-million-dollar franchise on his back. He smiled on cue, performed with precision, but began to lose his sense of self. He once said he buried Jalil so that Urkel could live. As the show ended in 1998, he struggled to transition into adult roles. No one wanted Jalil White. They wanted Urkel, preserved in adolescence. Offers dried up. He grew depressed, disoriented by the whiplash of fame and sudden obscurity. He tried reinventing himself as Stefan Urquell, the smooth alter ego of Urkel, but even that couldn't release him. His success had become his prison. He pursued college, graduated from UCLA, and tried voice work and writing. But the shadow of Urkel followed him. He never married, though he had a daughter with an ex-girlfriend. Their relationship was tumultuous and ended in a bitter custody battle, splashed across tabloids. His personal life, once protected by his parents' care, now unraveled under public scrutiny. In recent years, Jalil began to reclaim his identity, hosting, producing, reflecting. But the scars of his childhood stardom never fully healed. There's always an edge of weariness in his voice, the quiet ache of a man who never got to grow up on his own terms. As of 2025, Jalil White is still alive, with an estimated net worth of $8 million. It's a fortune earned not just through television, but through survival. He will always be remembered as Urkel, but behind the glasses and high-pitched voice is a man who endured being frozen in time, and who's still learning, slowly, to be seen as himself. Darius Creston McCrary was born on May 1, 1976, in Walnut, California, into a family with music and performance in its blood. His father, Howard McCrary, was a Grammy-nominated gospel musician, and Darius was expected to shine. And shine he did. By age 13, he became a household name as Eddie Winslow, the cool, confident older brother on Family Matters. America saw the perfect teen, charming, handsome, funny. But what they didn't see was the boy behind the scenes, conflicted, overworked, and cracking beneath the pressure to grow up too fast. Fame found Darius early, but guidance did not. On set he smiled. At home, he wrestled with identity, addiction, and a growing sense that he wasn't in control of his life. As the show wore on, 215 episodes over nearly a decade, he became typecast, locked into Eddie's image while yearning for something more serious, more raw. But Hollywood had no interest in a grown-up Eddie Winslow. When the series ended in 1998, the offers stopped coming. Struggling to transition, Darius spiraled. He battled substance abuse and found himself in and out of the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Multiple arrests, lawsuits, and tabloid scandals painted him not as a gifted actor, but as another former child star gone adrift. His personal life mirrored the chaos. Divorces, a strained relationship with his child, and public accusations of domestic abuse. He denied the allegations, but the damage was lasting. The boy who once lit up the screen had become a man fighting to reclaim what was lost. And yet, underneath the anger and pain, there was always a glimmer of heart. Darius clung to music, his other inheritance, and tried to rebuild through small film roles and independent projects. He spoke openly in interviews about childhood trauma, about feeling used and discarded by the very system that made him. He was raw, unfiltered, often volatile, but real. As of 2025, Darius McCrary is still alive, carrying the weight of his past with a bruised but beating heart. His net worth is estimated at $100,000, a staggering fall from the millions his face once generated. He was the golden boy, the smooth-voiced teen idol who once seemed untouchable. But behind the bravado was a child thrust into adulthood, never taught how to survive when the camera stopped. And now, every day he wakes up, he fights not for fame, but for peace. Which character from Family Matters, TV series 1989 to 1998, holds a special place in your heart? How does it make you feel knowing that some of the beloved cast members are no longer with us? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If you've been enjoying this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.